Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. Kids are weird, right? Small humans learning how to exist. It's a lot of work to teach a child how to survive in this world. My brother has a couple of kids, and he seems tired a lot. Good for him for doing it, though, and good for you if you're a parent. Kids are molded from clay in your hands. Each lesson is a building block upon their journey of knowledge. But let me ask you something. What do you do when your kid asks a question that you don't have an answer for? Like when it's just the two of you and they say, "Who's that standing in the hallway?" Uh-oh, right? They're going to look at you as a reference point of the situation. Should they be scared? How will you react? Better think quick, though, just in case this time it is someone real that's broken in. Now, if that's the case, you'll eventually be explaining how monsters are real, but they are disguised as people that just look like other mommies and daddies in the world. And what if you can't see who's in the hallway? Well, then you might be the one having things explained to you. From the unknown to the uninvited, we've got it all here on The Darkest Hour. So, let's get started, shall we? I lived in a house from ages 2 to 13. It was a smaller bungalow. There were 3 small bedrooms down a long hallway that led to the living room. There was a finished basement with a concrete room, which was intended to be used for cold storage. I remember being absolutely horrified of this room. I always used to see shadows of a creature or human-like figure, which appeared to be watching me whenever the door was left open. I would refuse to go anywhere near that room and would cry hysterically if I got too close. Additionally, whenever either of my parents went into the basement, I would stand at the top of the stairs, screaming bloody murder, begging my parents not to go near the room and to return to the main floor. Upstairs, my room was directly across the small hallway from my parents'. I would refuse to enter the hallway at dark, and my mom told me that I'd often wake up screaming and crying in the night, begging her to sleep in my bed with me so the shadows wouldn't hurt me. In the living room, I remember playing or watching TV. Out of the corner of my eye, I would always see an older couple with outfits that appeared to be from the 1800s. The man wearing a top hat and a black suit that was shorter in the front and longer in the back. The woman was wearing a dress that was wide at the bottom and had a corset top. This couple would pace back and forth down the hallway, often stopping for a couple of seconds before turning around to pace the other way. However, every time I turned my head to confirm what my peripheral vision saw, they would disappear. Up until the day we moved at the age of 13, I refused to be alone in the house due to the grim feeling of being watched that I was overcome with any time I entered the house. I would wait in the backyard for 2 hours until my father got home from work, so I didn't have to be home alone. Immediately after we moved, these feelings and my history of night terrors stopped completely. Fast forward a decade later, now in my 20s, I'm having lunch with my mom and her best friend when the topic of our old house came up in conversation. I began telling my mom about how eerie I felt as a kid living there, but as an adult, I quickly brushed it off as being a child with an active imagination. However, my mom informed me that she had the same feelings and odd experiences in that house, but never told me as she didn't want to scare me. My mom began to describe an old couple that she would see walking down the hallway. I couldn't believe it. Finishing each other's sentences, we discussed the same couple. almost word for word with their description. My mom even told me that she used to have a priest come over every couple of months while I was at school to bless the house. I still consider myself a bit of a skeptic, but it's really hard to explain my mom seeing the same couple as I did, despite never discussing them with one another. Years ago, probably almost 20, I was babysitting my baby cousin over at my aunt's house. It was time to put him to bed, so I carried him up the stairs to put him in his crib. Just as I reached the top of the stairs, I looked up, and for literally just a moment, I saw a young girl. Light-colored hair, curly, in a blue frilly dress with pants. One moment, she was there, and the next, completely disappeared. I wasn't frightened, and apparently neither was my baby cousin. He was sitting in my arms, waving in the direction of the door, saying, "Bye-bye." So I decided that if he wasn't scared by this, I wasn't either. So we both waved. Then I put him to bed and didn't think much of it until maybe a week later. My mom had taken me out to dinner, and that's when I casually brought up what I'd seen at my aunt's house. That's when my mom served me some very unfortunate news. She goes on to tell me that the family who lived there before lost their daughter. On moving day, nonetheless, the child had been run over by a moving truck in their driveway. It was horrible to hear, but I had so many questions. Like, why did my aunt and uncle buy the house, knowing what had happened? My mom told me that they were given the option to back out of buying the house, but they went forward with the purchase anyway. Chances are someone has died in a lot of homes, sweetheart. The world keeps spinning, I guess. That was my mom's response. So I asked my mom, "Is this what Grandma meant when she said, 'Can you believe what happened at that house?' and you shushed her?" She nodded. "You probably never would have babysat if I told you first." She had me there. I was glad she didn't tell me because she was right. And then I wouldn't have had the experience that I did. Totally creepy, but absolutely one of the most interesting things I've experienced in my lifetime. Even creepier, my mom told me that my aunt had heard a voice of a little girl come through on her baby monitor on more than one occasion. The little girl seemed to be very attached to my cousin. Or maybe it was the room. Maybe that room belonged to the little girl first. When I was younger, I was more receptive to the paranormal. I have a few tales of ghosts and other spooky experiences. It's been a while since I've actually seen something. I occasionally get knocking on doors, missing items, or the feeling I'm being watched when no one is around. My parents' home is definitely haunted. It's older than the city they live in and at the border of an even bigger, older city. We've had many experiences there in the 15 years that they've lived there. We know the house is haunted by something. What it is, we're not sure. This experience isn't related to it. A different experience altogether. I don't know if this is considered a ghost, to be honest, because who we saw was technically still alive at the time. I think I was still in high school because I was doing homework on the dining room table. My dad and brothers were also in the room watching the TV that we have in there. We rented a room in the house to a friend of the family, a large Mexican man. He was taking a shower in the bathroom that was next to the kitchen, adjacent to the dining room. He did this every day after work at around the same time. Behind the kitchen was our den, which had the door to the backyard and my mother's garden. I remember my mom had gone out to the garden. It was getting dark, and she suddenly rushed in from the backyard and zoomed past us. She went up the stairs to their room. So fast we didn't see her face. I remember my dad and I looked at each other, amused. He even asked, "What's her rush?" 2 minutes passed, and the bathroom door opened. It was my mom. She'd been the one in the bathroom taking a shower. Our tenant also walked into the house from work at the same moment. My dad immediately got up and went upstairs, because obviously someone broke in. There was no one upstairs. He checked every room. No one left the house either, because we'd had a view of the front door. Our tenant didn't see anyone go out on his way up the street. It really freaked us out. A couple of hours later, we got a call that my aunt, mother's older sister, had a stroke and was in a coma 2 hours earlier. My aunt looked a lot like my mom, same height and body build. She waited for us basically to travel to her city 6 hours away and to say goodbye, and then passed away. We do have something in the house that occasionally mimics people. However, it's never mimicked someone who didn't live there. This was different though, because the thing always leaves you feeling uneasy after seeing it, and usually it doesn't move. But she power walked across 4 rooms and up the stairs. My mom likes to think my aunt tried to say goodbye as she left our world. I like to think that too. I don't know if anyone else has had an experience like this, or if it's even considered a ghost. I've had a few experiences, paranormal, seen a couple ghosts. But this story is about my first experience, the old woman in the chair. It's basically what it sounds like. My mom and my grandmother, everyone, thought I was a bit off my rocker when I told them what I'd seen. We'd been at this very old hotel on the East Coast, one whose name escapes me, and anyone else that would be around to correct me or remind me, well, they're not around. I know specifically it was in the state of Maine, back in the 80s, but that's about it. Of course, I remember the actual event, because that was rather unforgettable. The lobby of the hotel had the check-in desk directly in front as you walked in, and to the right was a giant open room. And I mean giant. It must have at some point been a banquet hall or ballroom for a large number of people. I remember asking my mom and grandmother, ever so politely, if I could run around and look inside this whole new world. They agreed. My grandmother turned to watch as my mom finished checking us in. Passing through the large open room, I felt I wasn't alone. I turned around to see if maybe my grandmother had followed me, but she hadn't. She was standing there, and she waved. I shook off the feeling, and just before I got to the other end of this very large room, I stopped and turned around again. I knew I was being watched. There was an old woman sitting in the corner. She looked like she was sitting in a chair, but there was no chair there. Only a wall with some sort of plaques and awards. I recall thinking she didn't look as real as my own grandmother, but she was real. I remember knowing that and telling myself that firmly. I started to get closer to the woman, asking her what her name was. I wanted to get close enough to see how she was doing this trick, and also to see what was on her lap. But the closer I got to her, the more apparent it was that she was almost see-through. I started to realize I was seeing a ghost, and my expression, I could feel it shifting. Only my attention was drawn back toward the front desk, the entrance of the room, my mom calling my name, and my grandmother waving me over. I looked back in the direction of the floating old woman, only she wasn't there. Both my grandmother and mother were asking me who I was talking to and what I was looking at. They walked over to the wall filled with plaques and other things. And just like that, they were more interested in the shiny things than what had initially brought them in here. There was an old woman sitting in a chair, just there, where you're standing. I said this and was pointing just in front of them. They basically dismissed me. But I repeated, she was sitting right there. They weren't really getting it, or so I thought. They just looked around and then back at one another and back to me. Oh, really? What did she look like? I started to describe the woman, telling them that she was older, like my grandmother, but had long white hair, and it was in a side braid. She had a light pink gown on, or muumuu. She was almost see-through. And she had something on her lap. They didn't say much, just smiled and grabbed my hands. And then we started walking in the direction of the old service elevator. You don't believe me? I said this as I looked up at both of them. Sure we do, honey. You just point her out next time, okay? The rest of the trip, I kept going back to that room, really hoping that I would see the woman. Each time, I was disappointed. A few times I walked through there, I did get that same feeling, like I was being watched. And only one other time was there something there. Well, not really there, but the sound. I heard a small dog bark. It echoed in the room. And I thought for sure I'd see a dog when I turned around. But there was no dog. This was another thing that apparently I'd experienced on my own. My mom telling me that she didn't hear it, but also, honey, they don't let dogs stay at this hotel. I'm sure it was something else. She was probably right about this one, I thought. I hadn't seen any dogs. I brushed that off because that's usually what you do when you're a kid and someone with more knowledge of the world tells you what's up. But on our last night, we'd gone to the hotel's restaurant, which was located on the first level, opposite end of the floor as the huge dance hall that I'd seen the old woman. There was a photo in the restaurant. It was just above a small pillar fireplace in the center of the room. The picture was of a woman and her dog, a small white Maltese. I knew this woman. At least, I'd seen her before. I bet that's the dog I heard. They're probably together. I said this very nonchalantly as I continued to follow the server to our table. When we sat down, both my mom and my grandmother had interesting looks on their faces. My grandmother went back over to the photo. She was taking in the information under the photo, which I hadn't bothered to read. Well, honey, lucky you. It appears you've met the former owner of this hotel, and her dog, too, apparently. My mom was sort of amazed for the rest of the night, and the very next morning, as we were leaving, she walked the whole grounds with me, asking if I saw anything, if I saw the old woman. I didn't, but it felt nice to be believed. Like I said, I've had other sightings in life, and some were even after childhood, but this was my first sighting and by far the most clear. Years ago, my friend and I were stupid, bull-headed teenagers. We lived in a super small town, but my friend wanted to go to Chicago to watch a guy that she liked graduate from a Navy program. So we lied about where we were going, each of us telling our parents that we were at the other's house. It was only a 20-minute drive to Amtrak, but it was as if the universe was warning us not to go. My brake lines broke before we even left the driveway. We took her car instead, and it got a flat tire a mile down the road. Undaunted, we got a ride to Amtrak, and sure enough, our train broke down. So did the next one. It's a train bus station, so we decided to get a Greyhound. Bus had problems at first, but eventually we made it. On the ride there, the adults were kindly worried, telling us how stupid and dangerous it was to be going to Chicago alone, without anyone knowing where we were. We got to the bus station, didn't know it wasn't the same as the train station, like in our home state, and we were officially lost in Chicago. Out of the blue, a little old lady said that we looked like we needed help and offered to walk us to where we needed to go. She was soft-spoken and articulate, just like my grandmother, who died a couple years earlier. She was a school teacher, so was my grandma. I noticed a few other weird coincidences, but this next one got me. My hometown was almost the capital of the state. It was put to a vote and lost by 1 vote. My grandma, who loved our town, always said we won by 1 vote. Always. When the lady escorting us asked where we were from, and we told her, she said, oh yes, and she loved and was familiar with it, and that it was almost the capital. I said, yep, lost by 1 vote. And she said, no, dear, they won by 1 vote. Here's your stop. And when we turned around to thank her, she was just gone. Easily one of the weirdest things that's ever happened to me. My friend and I were both a bit shaken. I like to think my grandma was looking out for me. My daughter is 9 now. She's growing up way too fast. She's always been an old soul. She's always had a way with people and animals. When she was a baby, she used to enjoy sitting outside in the front yard on a blanket and playing. There was a little tree in our front yard with a robin's nest. When my daughter was outside, the robin would come down and hang out just a few feet away from her to keep her company. For my daughter, it was a completely normal thing. She would talk to it and wave, and the robin would stay for several minutes and then fly away. It was like they understood each other, and it was so amazing to watch. Her aunt lived several hours away on a ranch in the southeast corner of the state. My wife and kids went down there for a visit one weekend when my daughter was 3. The ranch had been in the family for over 100 years. They live in the same ranch house that was originally built back then, too. The matriarch of the family died several years earlier, long before my daughter was born. This woman's name was Elizabeth, which is my daughter's name, too. I didn't know that when we named my daughter. It was just a happy coincidence. During this visit, my daughter was downstairs playing. Everyone was upstairs playing cribbage. My wife heard my daughter talking and laughing, so she went down to check on her. She asked who my daughter was talking to, and she said, the other Elizabeth. My wife brought her back upstairs, and her and my daughter talked about this other Elizabeth to everyone else. She told everyone that this Elizabeth was an old woman wearing a dress. The aunt, my sister-in-law, retrieved a photo album and asked my daughter to just look through it. She didn't tell my daughter to look for anyone. She just said that she wanted to share some old pictures with her. My daughter, Elizabeth, took to looking at the photo album. When she came across the other Elizabeth's photo, my daughter pointed her out and said, "That's her. She lives here too." After that, my daughter never saw her again. At least, she never said so anyway. Well, just like that, it appears we've reached the end of The Darkest Hour. But be sure to join me every Friday night for a new episode, right here on the Darkest Hour YouTube channel. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com, and check out our subreddit, The Darkest Hour YT. Oh yeah, and if you love The Darkest Hour, and you never want it to end, be sure to hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell. Stay spooky.